All right, folks, Jay Navarro and the Traders are touring the West Coast in June. That's right, Jay Navarro with bands like Break Anchor, Hellmouth, and the Suicide Machines. They're touring in support of their new album on Bad Time Records, All of Us or None. Tickets are on sale now. Go to traderska.com to pick them up. June 9th in Portland, Oregon. June 10th, Seattle, Washington. June 12th, Sacramento, California. June 13th, San Francisco, California. June 14th, Anaheim. June 15th, North Hollywood. June 16th, San Diego. And June 17th, Tijuana, Mexico. Omnigon will be playing the Sacramento, San Francisco, Anaheim, and North Hollywood dates. And Stop the Presses will be on every date except for Tijuana. See you there.
When Eugene Robinson was a teenager, he discovered punk rock in New York. It was the 70s, and the genre had not yet found its way into the mainstream. At the beginning of the 80s, he relocated to California and found a new genre emerging: hardcore. He dove in headfirst as a fan, a musician — he was the lead singer of Whipping Boy — and as a journalist. He interviewed a lot of these bands and covered some infamous punk and hardcore shows. We brought on Eugene to discuss this time period. He has a memoir coming out in August about his punk years. It's called A Walk Across Dirty Water and Straight into Murderer's Row. It's available now for pre-order.
This is probably the most intense guest we've ever had.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Eugene Robinson, known for the band Oxbow and Whipping Boy, and their book Fight. Everything you wanted to know about fighting, but didn't want to get your ass kicked for asking. I think that's the title. Is that right?
Everything you want to know about ass kicking, and then didn't want to get your ass kicked for asking. That might be it.
Okay. Well, hopefully Eugene doesn't beat us up.
You remember, though, the first time we met Eugene was at a Narboots show.
We did. I recognized him in the audience, and I went up to him and said, "Are you Eugene Robinson?" And then he went, "Yeah, I am." And then I gave him a big hug because I'm a big fan.
Did you invite him to do the podcast back then?
No, we didn't have a podcast back then.
You've written this book called A Walk Across Dirty Water and Straight into Murderer's Way.
Row.
Murder. Oh, I was like, I bet I'm going to mess up. I don't know. I write it down and somehow I write it down wrong. It's so bizarre.
Well, look, I like these difficult titles. I mean, I could have just written the Fight book, but instead I wrote Fight. Everything you ever want to know about ass kicking, but afraid you get your ass kicked for asking. It's a mouthful.
You've written several books already, but this one's about your punk years. Your punk, right?
Yes, sort of. Yes.
Yeah. So I want to get into. I haven't read it yet because it's not available to be read yet. But I am familiar with several of your stories from this era, which I want to talk about. But I'm curious why. You've written several books, and now you're writing this book. I'm curious about that.
Yeah, the provenance is really strange, right? I mean, Adam Parfrey, the son of the famous character actor Woody Parfrey, who some of you may know from Planet of the Apes, was one of his big roles. He has been asking for years. I have known him, I don't know, 40 years, right? He's now passed on, and he'd been asking me to write a memoir. Mm-hmm. And it didn't make any sense to me because I absolutely positively don't think you should lie in your memoir. Mm-hmm. But I was not in a position at all to tell the truth. And then, I figure I've got 4 kids. They don't really need to be reading this stuff about me, or for me to tell a story the way I would tell it. So Parfrey died. And as a matter of kind of due diligence, I think Christina Ward and his sister, who now run Feral House, had decided to revisit. And Christina even took the unusual step of flying out here to talk to me. And she said, "Listen, what are your why are you resisting this? And I said, all of my filthy, disgusting sex stories, I don't think that they're really, yeah, no, I don't think, I mean, no one wants to hear, my ex-wife at one point screamed at me. She goes like, hey, I'm not one of your gym buddies. I don't want to hear this. And I feel pretty certain that she wouldn't want me to write it. So, we're divorced, but I figured, okay, I have certain sensitivities now. Christina goes, you know what? You know what? We don't want your sex stories either. And I was like, really? What about the time I? She goes, no, 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 no. We don't want any of them. That I said, but let me tell you what interests me about your story, that you were in, based on just a cursory kind of talk with Adam, Adam, with you briefly. You were at interesting places during interesting times, and I think your perspective could be. I've read your writing. I think you might be able to give it a look that has thus far not been done. Like, and besides which, we don't have the money to pay for you to do an entire life memoir. So why don't you do birth through 27, which ultimately puts me at the beginning of Oxbow. So which carries me from, birth through the creation of Whipping Boy, hardcore, and then ends right around the time that Oxbow starts. And that'll carry us through quite a lot. And I was like, yeah, I can do that. I was still, I marked that as time before I completely lost my mind. So that worked. That worked quite nicely.
Let's get into some of your stories. Some of these people might already know just because you've told them in interviews, but I want to talk about them anyways. Mm-hmm. Let's start with the infamous Misfits story.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, that was at the Elite Club, which used to be, it's the Fillmore. It used to be the Fillmore. When then during the hardcore days was the Elite Club, and now it's back to being the Fillmore again for San Francisco fans of death and suicide. It is right next to the People's Temple, what used to be the People's Temple, which is now a post office, I believe. So it's always had kind of a weird, weird cachet. But it was, might have this theory that any show that you play on the night of a day that begins with rain is good. It curses the show. It's like it's happened so many times.
Yeah.
If you wake up and there's sun in the sky, you go, oh, I'm going to have a good time tonight. And then if you wake up and it's raining, you think, I'm going to try to have a good time tonight. And these are fundamentally different experiences, trying to have a good time versus having a good time. So we went to San Francisco, and I have since revived. I've been all over the place in terms of an emotional take on this. And I've actually written Danzig subsequent to this event. Uh, but I'll get into that in a second. So,
yeah.
we're there at the show, and people are kind of churlish in a San Francisco way. Like there's certain things. If you were West Coast hardcore, Whipping Boy's first show, there's a fusillade of spit and bottles and cigarettes and anything else that could be thrown. And I couldn't have been happier myself,
Just for context, people don't know. I think we're at 1982.
Yeah, like it's 80, 81, 82, something like that. Right,
Okay.
right. So so they show up. It was sparsely attended. There weren't tons of people there. So, and it's a big hall. So for the Misfits who are used to playing, packed house, I mean, to pack CBGBs was not that difficult, but it's a different sensation. And people it was a rite of passage. They had to flip shit at the band. I don't know where these guys, if you're on a tour a long time, you just don't have the patience for it. I mean, with Oxbow, I've savaged people at shows because, if it's a 5-week tour, man, at the end of it, you just don't have the patience to mess around. I much like people with epilepsy, I know enough about myself to know I need to warn the promoter. And I've done this before. I said, those guys that are jumping on stage with those other bands before us are playing, putting their back to the band, throwing stuff at the band, you need to make sure your bouncers police those guys, or you're going to force me to do it. And this is now written into Oxbow contract. But of course, this was not at all what was going on in 1982.
So this was you were there in the capacity of like you were writing about the show, right?
No, I had not intended to write about it. I was just an audience member.
Oh, you're just an audience member. Okay.
And Rollins is the one who was big on the Misfits and told me, called me and said, you got to see them. It's before email, right? So you got to see them. So okay, I go. And people said, fuck you, and then of course they made the 100-foot cliff dive into stupidity with a San Francisco audience, because the Misfits at that point start saying, you fucking faggots. And it's like, man, you can't do that in San Francisco. And apparently there was a backstory which is disputed by Chris Desjardins from Flesh Eaters, who, as a joke, decided to take all these kind of macho Jersey guys to gay bars and our gay bookstores in San Francisco just to mess with him. Now, I've talked to him since, and he said that's not what happened. So okay, whatever. But they busted loose with the faggot thing, and then people got angry in earnest and started throwing beer cans and so on, and then Tim, this kid from Berkeley, very small, kind of diminutive character, who had done something maybe, but then turned his back to the audience, or turned his back to the band. And Doyle, who was standing right behind him, took off his guitar and, wielding it like what people call guitars, axes, brought it down on the kid's head. And you could feel. I didn't know this was happening until I could feel the vibrations through the floor, and turned, and Tim was fetal position on the floor with this nimbus, the spreading nimbus of blood from his head. And he was, I mean, if you've ever seen anybody knocked out, it was worse than that. He was absolutely not moving, not twitching, nothing. And so there was an immediate assumption that he was dead.
Wow.
And then we flipped out. And I think the entirety of Whipping Boy was there. And, if you remember, Steve, our guitar player, was like 6'7", 270 pounds. So he and I jumped on the stage, kicked through the bass drum, tore down the banner, chased him off stage. They were, and then we're circling the block for like an hour, waiting for them to come out or to get a hold of their van or whatever. And we never got them. But of course, then I went back east, because I'm from back east, and went to see matinees at CB's. And one of the guys that we punched was Googie, who was a drummer. And we talked about it, and said, yeah, it's unavoidable. And I never would have, as a guy in a band now for 40 freaking years, I understand that you have to sometimes demand a certain quality of respect. But you got to understand that guitars are heavy. You could actually murder somebody with it, and nobody is going to a show to be murdered. So the letter I wrote to Danzig was a kind of acknowledgement that I believe that what they were doing was artistically valid, which was not something I said in the article I wrote. And so I just wanted to I still don't find it defensible, almost murdering somebody.
No.
Yeah, no.
In that instance, there are other instances in which it's perfectly admissible, but in that instance, no. And I never got a response, and I didn't really expect to. But as a journalist of some measure, I just thought it behooved me to set the record straight.
Yeah, because you in the article you wrote about it, you talked about the incident, and you also basically said that Danzig sucked, or not Danzig, but Misfits. They sucked. They're a horrible band. They sounded like shit. But you felt like, and I understand where you come from. I've been a journalist for a decade and a half.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to, like, if you're going to state an opinion, if you're going to talk about something, you want to have all your facts straight.
Yeah.
And if the band didn't sound like shit, and you say that, it kind of like discredits everything else a little bit.
Well, what bothered me is that I said they were bad artists, and they might have been a lot of things. They might have been bad people. They might have been bad men. They might have been all. But what I regretted saying was that they were bad artists, because they absolutely were not. Their songbook holds up over time, and for a guy from Lodi, New Jersey, whose father said that he sucked and he would never amount to anything. And and he has been roadieing for bands and living that lifestyle since he was like 10. The only other person I know who's been in music longer is Harley, and it's no mistaken that those two are friends or known associates, and they're just different types of cats. I'm sure he would say at this point, yeah, just don't fuck with me. But it's not even about fucking with me. It's like it's more like this is not only. Is this it? This is everything. Not interested in anything else, not doing anything else. There is no plan B. This is my life. I'm sorry you had a bad Thursday, but I don't want you throwing full bottles of beer at my head. Thank you. So.
Mm-hmm. And so you were standing right next to Timmy
Yeah,
the kid when this happened, right?
yeah, yeah.
Wow. Did you watch it happen?
It was I saw Doyle take his guitar off, and I assumed that he would have done what I was gonna do. What I would have done in the instance is like, hey, I get paid with you. I get paid whether I play or not. It's in our contract, so fuck you. I'm going home. So I saw him take it off, and then I heard this, felt this thump through the floor, the vibrations through the floor, and then I turned, and he was standing, and I knew it was serious because I turned around and the guitar had already had already descended, but the look on Doyle's face was like abject terror.
Like he realized he fucked up.
Oh my God.
Yes, immediately. And then so I followed his eyes to Timmy, and then it was then all hell broke loose. So
Wow.
yeah, it was a heavy night. I mean, and keep in mind, people had been getting stabbed with church keys on the dance floor that night. So it was a weird night in total. But that was just like the cherry on the on the top of the cake.
Wait, stabbed with church keys?
Yeah, I don't want to put anybody on Front Street because she and I are friends, but at one point I'm like, walking across the dance floor to go somewhere, and I see her, like this is New York was moshing, so back then they call it thrashing, and she was thrashing with a church key, and I thought, oh, it's just decorative until I saw her catch a couple of people in the face with the church key. I was like, it's a little heavy, a little heavy. Yeah, and people were getting mugged in the bathroom. In the girls in the women's room, right? Not this was men were fairly. It was just a lot of insanity that night in general.
Wow. Yeah, I'd read one thing I didn't know about this, and because I was reading about it on a different article unrelated to your experience with it, is that after the event, after the show, that there was like an unofficial ban of Misfits by a lot of the promoters because of it.
I didn't know that there was a ban, but you got to understand. I think that was a Paul Rat show, and the kind of security that you would have had to hire to have them come back anytime soon would have been cost prohibitive. I think that it's not like they'd played San Francisco before. They played the first time they played. It was a stupid booking. I think. I had seen Black Flag down at the MAB, and I think they booked the Misfits the same time up at the on Broadway. It was really weird. So like nobody went upstairs. I mean, they played before, but this time this was the large venue. It wasn't really well populated. Certainly not well. There was not well staffed, and then they bust off with the faggot stuff, which was just not gonna fly. And so yeah, I don't know that there was a ban, an official ban. I mean, the promoters that would have booked them after that are Dirk Dirksen, Wes Robinson, Paul Rat, and I'm pretty much sure that that was it. Queenie Taylor, as far as I know, hadn't entered the picture yet, but yeah, nobody was going to take a chance after that.
Yeah.
And there had not developed, like nowadays we're used to it. I would call it the Fox News two step. No matter what happens, there'll be a counter opinion within 36 hours of the news cycle. I could
Mhm.
go shoot a bunch of kids right now, and then within 36 hours of the news cycle, somebody will be saying like, "Oh yeah, but Eugene was." There'd be
Yeah.
some kind of, and there was that didn't start in regards to the Misfits. For it became a East Coast West Coast thing, in which we got caught up in because I wrote that article. Midwest siding with the East Coast. I mean, we played all over and didn't have any problems, but certain people then tried to just in the press, never face to face. Tesco V and the Touch and Go guys tried to talk shit about us. It ended up being in total. It ended up being. It was a bad end for them, and I felt some sort of obligation. I mean, I didn't pay for the ticket. I didn't, but their farewell tour that they did in San Francisco, a buddy of mine bought a ticket and said, "You want to go?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." And I went, and it was a great show. It was at Oakland Coliseum, and yeah, and I don't know. I mean, I think it was regrettable. I mean, unfortunately, Danzig is one of his. I mean, he's a terrible self-advocate. you know, he's just one of those guys who'd be better off. It would be much easier to appreciate him as an artist if he didn't talk so much. And it's not his fault. People are running into his, shoving microphones in his face. I guess he just says whatever. But it's like, come on, what do you expect of Bertrand Russell? The guy's been doing this since he's 10. Don't be asking him about politics, but whatever. But yeah, but so there was a thing. It took about. That's what I was going to say. It took about 6 years for there to be a constituency of people who were like, kind of not so much fuck Timmy, but yeah, I like the Misfits. I don't care what you say. And it started in the South Bay, as far as with guys who later became friends of mine. Corey O'Brien from the Faction was the first one who was, I don't give a shit. I like
Yeah.
them. And I started, and so he didn't know Timmy, but he was part of our scene. Then that was the first time I started to say, well, let me separate the artist from the art here in this instance. And
Corey's the owner of or he was the owner of the Blank Club, and now the Ritz. Is that what it's called?
I didn't know that. Good for you. I didn't know he and I worked at Apple together at the time, and that's when we actually became actually friends.
Mhm.
We were seen friends before then, but I mean, we worked together at Apple. It was like, hey, we're the only people like us here, so let's go get lunch. So that was kind of cool.
So Corey, I was writing at the Metro newspaper in San
hmm
Jose,
hmm
and Blink Club had hit like a milestone, like I can't remember, some kind of anniversary, like 7 years or something.
hmm
And I asked if he wanted to do an article. He agreed to it, and he said, "Come over to the Blank Club." And so I get into the Blank Club. This is like in the daytime. There's no one else there,
hmm
and he goes, "I just want you to know that I hate doing interviews."
hmm
I'm like, "Okay." He's like, "All right then." And then
Okay.
we talked about the Blink Club.
Cool. Yeah, he's got a reason for that, but that's for another time.
So, okay, there's this very famous photo of I think it's the dead Kennedys at in Staten Island,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and you're right in the center, the most animated person in that photo.
hmm
Can you tell a little bit about that photo and that show?
Yeah, it's a Phil and Flash photo, and Phil and Flash was a Boston guy who was the brother of Springer, who sang for SSD, and Nancy Burrill, Al Burrill's wife, Al being the guitar player for SSD. She and I got into it online, and we established, based on her dating timeline with Al, that was the same weekend. That was a CB show. SSD played the Dead Kennedys did not play the CB show, but they did play in Staten Island. But it was the same weekend. So that and SSD had just gone on stage when that picture was taken, and Phil and Flash came and told me that he had taken it. But in the days before cell phones, I mean, this was like remote that I would see this thing. It's just so he had something he had in his camera, took it back to Boston. But of course, then I started seeing it on posters, and it's at this point semi iconic. Drew, whose last name, who does the New York hardcore series out of New York, made a film about Drew Stone, made a film about it, and used it on the poster. And it appears all over the place. And people are like, is that you? I go, the fuck, that doesn't it look like me? It looks like me. I mean, I know, of course. I mean, I used to be such a huge SSD fan, but that night that the Dead Kennedys played was in Staten Island, and that resolved it. That was a riot, an actual riot, and it was cool because it sort of in my head shifted certainly how. I mean, I'm old enough, and I started in '77, right? And so I remember punk rock as being, the product of, yeah, guys and girls from NYU, RISD, who were like maybe 5 or 6 years older than me, like art students who were tourists, they were experimenting with stuff and not especially physical. I mean, I remember talking to Thurston Moore about getting mugged in the Lower East Side, and when punk rock started to kind of decline, there were only a few people who made the transit over, right? Like there are people who I remember from going to shows in '77 were very few and far. Jack Rabbit, who I was hanging out with because he was friends with a friend of mine that I went to high school with, David Satz, and then there was Harley, and Harley's aunt was in played bass for the Stimulators, which was the band that he was in, and Denise, I think her name was, and she was like 25, right? So it seemed like very old to me if I was 16 or 17. And so those cats had kind of disappeared. Then hardcore hit super hard. So, the art students, the punk rockers, you know, this is when people were pogoing. They were not especially physical, and they were, I mean, if you look at early photos of the Ramones, and you understood their use of the word punk, they meant punk, prison style punk. They didn't mean punk sitting in the back room throwing switchblades at the teacher punk. That's not what they meant. So
Yeah.
these guys were getting their asses handed to them on the Lower East Side. You talk about gentrification. They weren't having any of that in '77. But this riot was instructive and interesting to me because it was hardcore ownership at this point. Like what kicked it off, there was a woman named Lazar, who, rest in peace, she's gone now, but she and I were talking out front, and apparently some cousine had tried to hit on her before, which is kind of what I was doing because I always had a thing for Lazar. And and apparently she had told him to go fuck off, and maybe he saw her talking to me and was like, that would not stand. He came over and said something like, you fucking ugly skank, you bitch, whatever. And she very calmly took her belt off. She had, kind of a, I don't know, is a drive chain belt of some kind, and whipped him across the face with it. I was like, whoa. And she didn't break the conversation. She did it and just kept talking to me. And I was like, okay. And he had run to the pizza parlor next door, came back with a baseball bat and threw it at her, like a spear. And it stuck in the storefront window that we were standing in front of right next to the Paramount. And then I fucking punched him, knocked him down. She started kicking him, and everything went nuts after that. The fucking cousines ran out of the pizza parlor. But the hardcore kids in New York were like, they were like the lost boys, man. These were like they've been beaten by their fathers since you read Rogers' autobiography. These were working class kids who had tough lives, and they were not about to go the art student route. So we fucked these guys up. And then Booby, who used to drum for a band, Anti Warfare, he drove that night. And so he actually, just like some scene from the movie, he got in the car, and it was a rust colored Woody station wagon. And we stood on the roof and on the hood, and some people rode in the back to get to the ferry with, a bunch of us running down the street on either side. And we got out of there after having kicked all these kids I mean, they were our age, but they were cousins, which for people who don't know, it's like an Italian version of a cholo. Like if you've seen, Jersey Shore, that's what we're dealing with. And that was for me really instructive because I had never seen punk rockers like, you know, this was the dividing line between punk rock and hardcore, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, you were at the kind of the famous like Bad Brains 3 nights at CB's, right?
Yeah, that too. That was fantastic.
All 3 nights?
All 3 nights. It was like Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, and the day after Christmas, or something like that. It was phenomenal, phenomenal. I mean, which means that it was fundamentally a 3-hour set, And as a guy, a performing artist myself, I was like, how are they going to pull it off? How are they going to do it? I don't. Can they do it? Can they do? Yeah, okay, it's different days, and it was transformative.
So you're saying they didn't repeat material?
There was some of the same songs, but these were three distinctly different shows. It's three distinctly different shows. If I remember correctly, the one on Christmas Day, I mean, given their proclivities for Rastafarianism, was much more dub based, right? So this is religious music. So it was a little bit more restrained, but the day before and the day afterward, fire.
Yeah.
Mm.
Any memories from that show that really just stick out to you?
Yeah, the opening. I think they opened with Right Brigade. I mean, I guess it's on the video, which is why I hesitate to say. But whatever it is, with that Earl's long drum lead up, and then Gary's slide guitar, dun, 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 dun. And when it drops and it breaks into the song, I don't think I felt before or since then, a greater sense of absolute joy and exhilaration. It was really, I can't even, I can't even, and I know that I mean, the stories have accrued about, yeah, the shit that they did in Texas, but even beyond that, I just recorded some stuff with a guy down in Memphis, Tennessee. And he was like, yeah, HR, I was in a band with HR. I go, oh, cool. Tell me about it. He goes, no, not so cool. We were scheduled to go on tour, and the morning of the tour, we woke up and uh, he was gone. And I was like, "We're gone. What do you mean gone? He's just gone." I go, "Oh well, he's a little nutty. He's got this bipolar thing going." And they go, "No, man, he was gone, and he had taken the van."
Oof.
I go, "The van, yeah, with all of our gear in it." I mean, he said like, "Oh, I should sleep in the van in case somebody steals it." And then he stole the van with all of the equipment in it, all of the T-shirts, all the merch, all the CDs, all the amps, all the guitars, everything. Never saw him again. Never saw it again. And I was like, "All right, man, the dude is clinical. I don't know what to tell you." But again, I have to separate the artist from the art. Those shows were phenomenal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're from New York. Then you moved to Northern California in like 1980, right?
September of 1980.
Now, did you move specifically to go to Stanford, or did that come later?
No, I went to go to Stanford.
Okay.
I mean, I figured I wanted to go someplace that I might like to visit, because I never expected to have left New York for this long. I surely, people go to college and they go back home, and I certainly expected to do that, and that's not how things worked out.
Do you still feel like you're a New Yorker at heart?
I'm a New Yorker at heart for sure. Yeah, I'm for sure. I mean, we've had this discussion with my kids many a time. Said, "Dad, you're kind of rude." I go, "No, no, I'm not rude. You are California kids, and you have a New York father. That's the deal.
Yeah.
I'm mild. You should spend a week there." But no, I realized that I, for a long time, maintained the illusion that I was going to go home, and then I put that to bed about 15 years ago when I realized it was a kind of confluence of a bunch of things. I'd interviewed Chris Rock, and we were talking, and he's kind of, I mean, it's more in evidence now, but back then it was what I would have called a right wing sentiment. He was like talking about Dinkins, who was the mayor then, and he was like, "Listen, I was mugged twice under Dinkins. I've not been mugged at all under Giuliani. Make what you will of that." And I was like, "Nah, man." And I started to express some sort of begrudging kind of like I miss, like the agnostic front song about missing old New York. Like I miss. And he goes, and he had me on this one. He goes, "The teenager in you misses that New York. The 37-year-old man does not miss that. You don't want to know, man, no." And I figured, he's right. So the New York that I was thinking I would go back to didn't exist. And I realized that California had changed. Like, I used to get on the subway and ride for 45 minutes to get to my gym, and then walk 6 blocks through the snow in the wintertime to get to my gym. It took me, it's like, if an hour and a half workout, it easily took me an hour and a half to get home through the snow. And it's like now I am 4 miles from my gym. And when the gym was talking about moving, I was like, "Fuck that, bro! I need a new gym." I've become a Californian at that. I'm not driving any further than I have to.
So you're Whipping Boy. You formed that band around 81, I think.
Yes.
With other Stanford students.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
It was. I paused there because I'm not sure that our first drummer was a Stanford student. He was one of those weird guys. Like, he was. I mean, again, it seemed like aged to us, but he was probably about 24. Dave McLean, and I don't know that anybody ever saw him in class or he went to any classes, but he was there, just kind of hanging around. But he was our first drummer. So, but yeah, Adam Zimbardo was the first bass player. Phil Zimbardo, the Stanford Prison Experiment guy's son, and he's from New York too.
Oh, wow.
So we kind of bonded over that. And then Steve Ballinger, who stayed the longest of the original crew.
Now, was your first show not an intended show. It was like Circle Jerks were playing, and you guys somehow made your way on stage and just did a few songs.
That's when we're crazy, man. We're at the show. Is at the
How'd this
is at the
happen?
farm, and Effigies played, and the Circle Jerks were playing. I don't remember who opened, and I was like, God damn it, we should be playing this show. And Steve and I would get into these extreme acts of violence, but that started philosophically, right? Like, I mean, I remember we were walking along one night, and I almost stumbled into a bike rack, and I said, "Who would put this here? Look at the feng shui of this. This is all wrong. Can't you see that 100% of the people are 100% of the gonna die?" He goes, "Well, where would you put it?" I go, "Well, if I had my druthers, I would put it over there." And Steve was incredibly strong. He yanked this thing out of the ground, and I yanked. I said, "Well, I'm not going to be outdone because I lifted weights too." I yanked the other end, and we took it and we put it where it should be. And it was the same kind of thing. We're at the farm, like, all our whole band is here. Why don't we play? And he goes, "You know what? I'm going to ask the promoter." And I'm kind of blind to the physical. Like I said, Steve was like 275. He's a really big guy. And we just go up to the promoter and say, "Hey, we're all here right now. Why don't you let us play a little bit before the Circle Jerks play?" And the guy goes, "Go ask the Circle Jerks." Like, he doesn't want anything to do with it, right? So we go to the Circle Jerks, which is, I mean, Keith is tiny, right? So Keith was like, I guess he thought it was like L.A., like, the subtle threat being, if you don't let us do this, we are gonna fuck shit up here, and it'll be a miserable show. So he was like, "Fine, we'll do it." And then, but you can't use our equipment. We go, "Okay, no, it's fine." And so we go to the Effigies, who were in town from Chicago. And what the fuck are they going to say? I mean, they knew us kind of because we were hanging around the guys at KPFA, Tim, Johanna, and so on. Or maybe we hadn't even started doing that yet. So we were just unknown. And we said, "Hey, man, can we use your, Keith wants us to play a couple songs before they go on. Can we use your equipment?" And he was like, "Sure." And so they say, "Yeah, next up from LA, the Circle Jerks." And we come out, and people are like, "What the fuck?" And we did I mean, back then, 3 songs. If our songs were 45 seconds long, I mean, the whole thing was over in like 4 minutes. But it was a fantastic 4 minutes, because that's when I met Klaus at night, and Darren Peligro, and so on. So, I mean, who came up to us afterward and like, "What the who the fuck are you guys?" So it was great. I mean, and like the Misfits, man, people were throwing full bottles of beer at our head. They didn't give a shit. They're like, "Fuck you," and I couldn't have been happier. I was just absolutely gleeful. So,
So, okay, now I'm curious. So we've kind of established sort of punk and hardcore. What was your first interaction with ska music?
oh, way before then. In fact, there's a funny story that one of the guy Booby, who I talked about, who was on the Village Voice, did a big spread on hardcore. There, everybody was entranced with moshing, and he was, kind of heavy set Soviet Georgian guy who was on the cover. Looked great, made great copy. But he asked me at one point. He was like, "Hey, you like the Specials?" And I was a huge Specials fan, but in those days, you weren't sure about what was going to be doctrinaire or not. And I paused a little bit, not too long, because I didn't give a shit. I was going to come out and say I love the Special. And he said, "Because I loved them." And I go, "Yeah, me too. I love them." And that was one of the factors that actually drew me to Stanford, because they had played at Tressidor the year before, like, not even the year, like a few months before I'd gotten there, and tore the place up. Everybody at Stanford was still kind of like pissed when I got there about it. I saw Madness when they came through, at the same place where I think I saw the Dead Kennedys at California Hall. So it was a Bill Graham show. But it was, in fact, you got to remember. So 77, um, the Sex Pistols played their last show in San Francisco.
Mhm.
Sid Vicious goes back to New York, starts making headlines. My stepfather at the time worked for the New York Post. This is before Murdoch bought it. And was, so he always says newspapers out. So was bringing home Eddie and the Hot Rods records, because nobody wanted to review it. But he heard this punk rock thing. He figured I might like it. I did like it. Started to read about the Ramones, Sid Vicious, then the Stabs, Nancy Spungen. So this was a big news story, and I was like, I want in. I want in. And I was already on the subway at that point, so it was easy. If it had happened when I was 10, I wouldn't have had such ready access to, but it was easy for me to get on the subway and get to Max's Kansas City, or or so on. So I had started to pay attention to stuff that was alternative, and and of course, at this point, I'm buying Soho Weekly News, and one of the first photographs I saw was a photograph of um, Linton from the Specials with a
Mhm.
gun, and I want to say holding the pistol in up Terry's nose, but I don't think it was Terry. I think it was Jerry Dammers. And is New York has had the guns weren't easy to get in New York. I had a shotgun, but guns weren't easy to get in New York. Pistols, and this is right around the time of the Bristol riot, so it had. I thought the Specials had an edge to them that was catnip for somebody like me. I mean, later I met some British guys who were like, "Yeah, we hated them. They were college guys." you know, we just thought it was just like these are guys that we would have crossed the street to avoid. We're not interested at all. But to an American ear and audience, this was something. And I mean, I remember when Rastafarianism became a thing. I was living in Crown Heights, and the only people living in Crown Heights then were like West Indians, primarily Haitians, and Hasidic Jews. And I remember the guys with the tams and the dreadlocks, and we used to make fun of their pants because we call them high waters. They were high water pants, and they all had this special walk, and we were just like mocking these Rastafarian guys. We had didn't know what was going on, but then you would, those were the days where the record stores would put the speakers on the sidewalk, so you started to hear it. And then by the time I'd gotten to be about 13, that's when Chris Blackwell, and I know this because I interviewed him. And he told me when they decided to reposition Bob Marley as a rock guy, and so once he was in the rock milieu, and he had tried that before and it hadn't worked out, but they finally packaged it right and it worked. And I suspect that it was a confluence of Rastafarianism and weed that made people like in the rock community embrace them. So at that point, you start to pay attention to Bob Marley, Rocksteady, ultimately ska, and so when the Specials come along, I was primed. And in fact, one of the last things I did New York, before I left New York, was go to a midnight showing of Clash's Rude Boy, and I was all scot out. I had my two-tone suit on and my loafers, and then of course got in a massive street fight, which had a broken bottle jammed into my ear, torn all the cartilage in my left ear, which is sewn
Wow.
back imperfectly and has caused me problems to this very day, which is why I started wearing duct tape to hold my earplugs in because my left ear won't support an earplug normally. Which I write about in the memoir.
What caused the fight?
Ah, man, it was just it's a long drawn out thing, but there's just a fucking street fight that I got. I probably should have the New Yorker in me should just kept on walking, but I think my goal was to render aid, which was foolish and misguided. um, and what was good though was that I'd gone home. Uh, I'd gone home still, you get a head wound, it bleeds a lot. And I'd gone home to get my shotgun to drive back and scare the guys. That was the plan. And my mother, who's a notoriously light sleeper, got up and said, "Hey, how you doing?" I go, "I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine." As I'm, putting my shotgun together, jamming the shells in my pocket. And she goes, "Can I come say goodnight to me?" And I was like, "Ah." And so I figured it'd be easier if I went to her because I knew her room would be dark. And but she was fast and came out and saw the blood and made my stepfather take me to the hospital. So probably a good wise thing that I didn't go back with my shotgun and shoot at these
Yeah.
guys. So but yeah, I was in the Specials were my gateway drug. I wasn't so into Marley. But I was also going to the Caribbean with my grandmother, and so knew a lot about calypso. So the rhythms were familiar to me. Um, but it was how they had filtered down to the Brits and came back with the Specials that impressed me. And then I saw Madness. Not only did I see Madness play in probably 1980 in San Francisco, but then Oxbow ended up playing a festival in Bristol with Madness, which was really immense, a big festival. And I was like, I'm standing there, backstage, and I'm like, it's cool, man. It's cool. They got a Madness cover band. And one of the production assistants goes, "What are you talking about? These guys, they're killing it." He goes, "It's Madness," and I just hadn't, this was like 2010, right?
Yeah.
So the first time I saw Madness was 1980. 2010 was 30 years later. I had not adjusted for the fact that humans age. So it was Madness, but I just hadn't adjusted. I just thought it was some old dudes playing cover tunes, It was funny.
When you moved to California in the early '80s, and you were more in part of the hardcore scene, what was there any ska that you were seeing at that time? Like any local stuff, any bands from the US coming through?
Um, there were a few, right? There were a few that caught my ear, and because they seemed to really not give a shit what people thought about them, and they really seemed to be pursuing. And I know this probably won't be a popular pick, but I remember Sublime, and I enjoyed, and sort of to a certain degree, what Rancid did with the ska rhythms. There was a whole nother category of ska that kind of mixed and matched with funk at the time. So
Mm-hmm.
now we're talking 86 and 87. And I knew Dickie Betts from the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones. In fact, that photograph that Phil and Flash took of us at the SSD show, he's in that photo with me. And that's how, not only is he in that photo, but Michael Gira, in a weird turn, is also in that photo. Also in that photo is Pete Guy, whose father was a singer for the Coasters. So this is like these weird little fun facts. So I knew the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones, but I wasn't so much. I mean, I knew him from the hardcore scene. It seemed to me to be a slavish imitation. Um, it's just like I liked, you know, I like Madness. I'm gonna do an American version of Madness. So I thought it was, I thought it didn't seem especially artistically valid to me. But this is me, being a man of my 20s, being kind of a prick. So I didn't take them seriously. And also, what was happening in my life when this was happening in the Bay Area was a lot of things that gave birth to Oxbow, which, if you've read interviews with me before, Oxbow's first record, Fuckfest, was intended to be kind of like a suicide note, right? So I was going
Mm-hmm.
through some weird times, and ska at that time in '87, say, had become sort of party music. It was fundamentally happy music, so I didn't have any patience for it. I absolutely didn't. I mean, there was an edge to the specials. I mean, if you listen to Ghost Town, there was an edge to the specials, but by '87, man, I was planning my suicide. No, I was not so happy. So
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, party music's not going to hit your ear right when you're thinking about that.
yeah, it's like, I'm glad you guys are enjoying yourselves, but I'm not. So
Being in the Bay Area, did you ever come across Skank and Pickle?
yep, yep. And they were introduced to me by Jeff Bruce, um, who was in Fungus, I think was the name of his band at the time. But yeah, I hated the name. Sorry. I see it's just unfortunate because I've read Aaron's book, so I know that, like,
Yeah.
I don't want to be like the fucking downer guy, man, because the enthusiasm with which you attacked it in the book was actually infectious. But it was just such a difficult time for me to try to be happy that
Oh, for sure.
it was just a tough time.
So, but back in New York, you were friends with the band Urban Blight.
Yeah, I wasn't friends with them, man. We went to high school together, and Jerry Faison, one of the trumpet players, was I was on the swim team with him, and then the main guy, Jamie Cars, was his girlfriend Odette Napel. I was working double overtime to seduce and failed miserably. Not only did I fail miserably back then, but I failed miserably over the years at high school reunions. That's a log. Whatever Jamie Carr's had going on was enough to keep me out of there for years. So, so, but those guys were great. I loved Urban Blight.
So they started in the 70s as kind of a dance party band, but I don't know if this was after you left, but once Two Tone came about, they started incorporating ska in their songs too.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised. No, Jamie had started them in high school, man. So I knew three guys in bands in high school. One was has just died. He was in Necron 99, James C2, and it was the first Asian kind of punk rock band. And we were in homeroom together, and I remember him bringing the bass in. He was in the band, and there was my friend Pishko, who was in a polka band, which seems funny at the time, but they had records, did tours, had a van, the whole bit. He was always rushing off to rehearsal, so it was my first glimpse into kind of. I mean, I was a theater kid. By the time I got into high school, I'd even stopped doing that. I was going on auditions for modeling shit and TV and movies and so on, unsuccessfully. My biggest audition was I auditioned for Manhattan, the Woody Allen movie, and of
Oh yeah.
course, all the black people you see in Woody Allen movies, you can imagine that was not successful. But um, so, um, but I knew Jamie Cars and I knew Faison from Swim Team. I think they were a couple years older than me, and there were a couple of guys who I later saw at hardcore shows who had signed on as roadies for Urban Blight, and they lasted a long time, way longer than I ever expected that they would. But they were always nice to me, nothing bad to say, and I think that they were. I wish that I ended up. I kind of one of those bands. I wish that I wish that they had gotten their due. I always remember feeling quite that they didn't quite get their due, and they deserved it. I thought.
Yeah. So okay, you mentioned the beginning of the interview, your book Fight, everything you wanted to know about ass kicking.
Everything you ever wanted to know about asking, but afraid you get your ass kicked for asking.
Yes.
I got to say it fast, otherwise I start to stumble over stuff too.
Okay, so let's talk about some more fighting stories. You already mentioned the Rude Boy one. There's the Oxbow documentary where you guys are in Bradford, England, and there's a guy named Big Chris.
Yeah.
Want to tell that story?
Fuck that guy. Still, it's like it had Styx was one of the drummers for the Clash was there. In fact, if you watch a documentary, you hear this guy pleading. He's saying, could you please get off the stage, give another band a chance? And that was Styx from Crass, which is funny because I did a panel at Supersonic with Penny Rimbaud a few years after that, so it was kind of an amusing thing. But it was a anarchist squat, So already I was in a bad mood, and of course, I have it in this is back when I was eating meat. Now I'm a pescatarian, but I had it in all caps that I needed to have meat. That was part of my diet there, and of course they're like, "Well, we don't do that here, man." I go, "Oh, really? What? Well, we have lentils." Yeah, fuck you and your lentils. Go out to a store and get me a hot dog. And they were like, "No, we're not." So already I'm cranky. And so we start playing, and they were trying to, Brits are trying to do this thing. Either they want to push you to see if you're like really real, like, man, there's no classism here, which is comical coming from the UK, right? It's like you're on stage and I'm in the audience, but we're really one. No, man, I'm 6,000 miles from home and loaded 2,500 pounds of gear into the club tonight. We are not the same. So I'm on stage and we're playing, and a guy comes up to me and he has drawn my tattoos, the tattoos I have on my body, on his body. And I appreciate his sense of humor because I'm a guy with a sense of humor. Above all else, I've got a sense of humor. And so I met his sense of humor and raised it with my sense of humor, which was to arm drag him into what we call a rear naked choke. And it's great if you look at the photo series. At first, he's playing along with it, and then he realizes he can't breathe. And then there's just this series, the photographs. It's from the movie where he's just getting lower and lower and lower until I drop him on the floor. And at that point, all hell breaks loose, right? So it was kind of like the Misfits at the Elite Club, but I just put him to sleep. I mean, that's the great thing about grappling. It's just about control. So he's on the floor, and now they're throwing fucking shit at us. And I was more concerned about the van, like, because if they'd gone out and stabbed four of the tires, that would have really fucked with our lives, right? So
Yeah.
I could deal with the bottles being thrown at me, and then afterward we left the stage, and we finished the set as we should have. And this table of three women said, "You need to sit down here. You need to explain to." And so we got into this big philosophical discussion about, we feel you're under an obligation to, have a trigger warning with your tickets. And I go, "Why would we do that? Well, there are no trigger warnings in life. You turn the corner left or right, bad things happen to people all the time, And it's four of us on stage. There's 100 of you guys here. So you got to understand, my sense of peril when I'm approached by this large man who, I didn't know what he was going to do." so, so her boyfriend is a sound guy at that point. He's like, yanks her away from the table, because it's clear after about 20 minutes of conversation that we're not talking because we don't like each other. Right? And he yanks her out, and my drummer hears him screaming on the stairs, "They are the worst band in the world." And then this guy, Paulie, from the band Pale Horse, who played with us that night, he sees me on the stairs as I'm loading gear out, because I'm trying to get to the stairs as quickly as possible to get to the van so that they don't stab out the tires. And he says, "Oh, you're in that band that just played, aren't you?" And I was like, "Yeah." Like, I thought he was going to say, "Oh, great show." He was like, "I didn't fancy it at all." And the only reason I know it was Paulie is because we've since become friends, And he was like, "I just wasn't ready for it that night, man. I just wasn't." And then, of course, we played. That was Bradford, and the next night we played Leeds, and the Leeds show, the word had preceded us, so the lead show was packed. But then the band that played support thought that they would be funny, and they played way too fucking long. And there's a curfew, and the club owner says, "Hey, man, you guys got to stop at 10. You got like 12 minutes." And Oxbow was like, "Well, what should we do?" And I was, "We'll do what we do. We take what we get." Then we played. It was super hot. It was really fucking hot. It was a death trap. Single staircase upstairs at this pub, and we played because it's only 12 minutes. We could just play scorching from beginning to end, and it was great. People really dug it. But of course, on the way to the stage, the band that had played extra long, who had been in Bradford, who were trying to fuck us over. The drummers changing over were moving really slowly, and Greg Davis, Oxbow's drummer, grabbed the guy's crown and threw it down the stairs. It's like, "Man, it's in the way. You got to move. We got 12 minutes." So they were angry, but after the conclusion of the 12 minutes, I think they gave us like 4 more minutes to go, and we played for the whole, that's 16 minutes. Fuck it, we did it. We got paid. Went down. People bought us drinks. They were totally happy. It worked out well. Nobody had to be stabbed that night.
Obviously, you have an interesting relationship with fighting, with your everything you've told about with punk rock and these interactions. You wrote a book about it. You do like jujitsu and other things like
7 days a week.
What do you feel about fighting? Do you feel like fighting is? You must have philosophies, I guess, about fighting and its place in society.
Yeah, I mean, when Farai Chideya interviewed me on NPR, she actually spent the entire 14 minutes trying to put some light between me and fighting. And they try to honey dick you with stuff like, "Well, you seem like a pretty bright guy," and it's like, look, I'm not out starting fights with people. I mean, generally, I'm fired up by the sense of injustice, and you got to realize, like, I've got four sisters, right? And I not only that, I have four daughters, and I have aunts and female cousins. The men that were in my family were married into my family. We have actually only managed to give birth like every 50 years. Like, there's me, like, and the next birth in the family is my grandson, right? I am 55 years older than my grandson. There are no other men. And people have had plenty of kids. I have a nephew, and he's 17, so that breaks the pattern, but he's like the only one, right? So typically, I see the guys who are doing stuff to me that motivate me to fight are guys who I know are doing shitty things to women, like, routinely, just like the band in Osaka, who I warned the promoter about. The band that had played support for us were women, and these guys were just jumped on the stage, put their backs to the band, and started talking to each other in the audience just to be fuck. And these are Japanese women, so they were just like, okay, okay, they just put up with it. And I'm looking at the promoter, and I'm looking at these guys, and that's when I say, if you don't fucking control this thing now, you're gonna have problems when we play. And whether it was a language thing, I told our Japanese translator to very clearly explain this to him, and nothing. So we start playing, and they were outside drinking. Osaka is different from Tokyo, in terms of tone and timbre. And the guys ran around the corner, and one guy was like jerking his dick at me. And I put the mic down on stage, and I jumped into the audience, and I grabbed him with an old style catch wrestling move that's called the flying mare. And when he hit the floor, he was unconscious. So bad. I mean, it was like the Misfits thing where Dan, Oxbow's bass player, was like, "I think we should probably stop the show and leave now because this guy looks dead." And he regained consciousness by the show's end, but nobody fucked with us after that. And I look at it like, you're either a friend of art or you're an enemy of art. And if you're an enemy of art, look, there are lots of ways that you can express yourself. You can leave. We'll be glad to give you a refund. You can walk right the fuck out the door. You can scream, "You suck," and leave. But to have a systematic campaign of disrespect, well, disrespect begets disrespect. And that guy had got what was coming to him. And then indeed, he was with about 14 other guys, and they got me after the show. And through the translator, they were like, "You were very strong." And I was like, "Yeah." And they're like, "Can we wrestle with you?" I go, "Okay, yeah, but I don't do that shit for free." And so I charged them to arm wrestle them, and I beat about seven guys in a row. And guy number eight actually legitimately beat me. I know it's nice to spin the story like that. I hustled these guys like a pool hall hustler, but he just the physics of his arm. He was a long, thin guy, and he actually legitimately fucking beat me, right? Which then guaranteed, one, it meant that those guys wanted to re-up. So I arm wrestled all 14 of the guys, and the guys who I'd beaten, the seven guys, want to come back. So I did 21 arm wrestling matches, and they all paid for them. And so that I made a huge amount of money that night in yen arm wrestling these guys. But of course, the next day I couldn't use my arm because it was so blasted out. Um, but I mean, what undergirded that was like, you just don't. Why this being an artist is like, if you don't want to be here, don't be here, man. But don't don't you're fucking with my hustle. Don't do it. I don't do it to you. Like Albini said, I don't come down to your job and slap the dick out of your mouth. Don't do it. Don't do it. It's inadvisable, right? So
yeah. I think maybe it's that, like, most people aren't willing to stand up to that.
um yeah, because we're hoping that things don't go south. But you got to realize, some comedian once was talking about, he was specifically talking about rednecks, and he was like saying, guys who don't like you and they're happy to see you. And that's kind of one of my ethos. Like, I don't like you and I'm happy to see you, because this is, I welcome teachable moments. But I mean, keep in mind, Yeah, in the last 10 years, the only fights I've gotten into have been in venues. They've not been actual street fights, right? I
Mhm.
mean, nobody in the street is absolutely mad enough to start trouble with. Plus, I don't really hang with other people, so it's like the order, like lay out in the fight book, is if you're dressed well and you're in a couple and you're in a hurry, you're prime because they know you're not going to spend the time. You dress nicely. You're with a woman. Maybe you're in a hurry. You're not going to take the time. If you as a single man, if you're strolling along and you don't look like you have much money, people are not going to fuck with you. It's just not going to happen. But I was with my wife in the Mission, and we were going to a show. So we were in a hurry. Like I was performing in the show with the Red Room Orchestra, and we're in a hurry, and these guys out there, some, like the black Hebrews, or some kind of African nationalist sect, two black guys and a Latino guy, and they say, "Brother, can we have some?" No, I'm in a hurry, and the Latino guy decides to offer an editorial opinion, and he says, you try sticking to your own, bro. And I got him at this point now. Just jujitsu. They talk about martial arts relaxing you. Well, it absolutely does not relax me. I flipped out, right? I flipped out. I said, "What did you say?" And the guys, I didn't say anything. I go, "No, no, 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 no. Now you don't get that now. What did you say?" And then the black cats were like, "Hey, bro, I said, you two should note that I'm not fucking talking to you." And they just cut him loose. At that point, they were just like, "You're on your own, dude." And I said, say one more fucking word to me. Your mother should have told you about talking to strangers, and now you're gonna learn a lesson. Say one more word. And of course, that's the best thing ever because the easiest thing for him to do is to keep his mouth closed. But of course, that's also the hardest thing to do. And so I just stood there and watched him struggle with this. And then at the end, I gave him that extra kick in the ass, which is like, yeah, I thought so. And we kept on walking. But I was so steamed. I was like, she had to do everything once we got back to the club to keep me because it was like 2 hours until showtime. I was like, "Hey, I left something in the car." She's like, "Nah, no, 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 you're not going. No,
She saw right through
yeah,
that.
it's like pointless. This is absolutely pointless. How come you can't see that?" I go, this guy, he said everything he needs that you could give him, you gave him. So just leave him be. Just let, I was like, all right. But otherwise, usually the scuffles are in venues because of people doing, like the guy in Belgium who was known for giving female artists a hard time, right? Like he fucked with Lydia. And so he came to a show I did with Jamie Stewart from Juju. Very quiet music, synthesizer, guitar, and my voice, right? And Kasha, my wife, did one song, and I could see this guy. He runs to the stage and he's screaming at her the whole set. Right? I don't put it together, right? I just I don't know. So she gets off, and he's still screaming, and I just know that I'm singing and the guy's screaming. I said, "Hey, it's about time for you to shut your fucking mouth," right? And the guy goes, "Well, I have an opinion." I go, ah. I step off the stage and I said, "Your opinion is welcome anytime outside of time when I'm doing what I'm getting paid to do. So how about you keep your mouth fucking shut or leave?" And the guy's like, "Well, or what?" I said, "Is it your desire that I strike you?" I got weirdly formal. That's why I remembered it. I said to him, "Is it your desire that I strike you?" And the guy's like, "Do what you got to do." Yeah. I don't know if you've ever seen attacks by like bears. They do this thing that's always pretty interesting. They acknowledge that you're there. They turn back to eating, which relaxes you, and then they attack. And that's kind of what I did. The guy says, "You do what you got to do," and I kind of go, "Huh?" And I look off the stage right because I was actually thinking about going back on stage. I wasn't like mimicking a grizzly bear, but I was actually thinking about going back on stage. And then I was like, you know what? Fuck this. and turned and knocked him right like Charlie Brown. The guy was airborne, and all of his shit was, his hat and his stuff was all spread out all over. And I was walking toward him now with like blood in my eyes because I was really angry. And he 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 diffused all of it by, as he was like, dizzy on the floor trying to keep his hold on consciousness, he said two words to me which I found it completely amusing. He said, no violence. I was like, I go, so it's okay when you're abusing women performers, but now suddenly it's not okay. What a funny turn of events, And so I get back on stage and I start to play, and then some other guy is taking photos of me. And I say, put your cameras away. It's written down at the front, no photos outside of the first 3 songs. Put your camera away. And the guy was like, ignoring me. And I think I said it in French. I have a basic kind of functioning French. Then he kept shooting, right? I guess he was offended that I'd struck the guy and then figured, okay, we're going to document it. So I go over and kick his phone into the night. And and then he starts taking his bag off. And then finally the bouncers appear and they say to him, what are you doing? Because he's now taking his coat off, right? And he goes, he wants to fight me. I will fight him. And the bouncers look at him like, hey, you got to go. And they finally put him out. I mean, just to save him. This was no way. This guy didn't have a chance. And that wasn't the point behind what I was doing. I just wanted to do the show. So, and then afterward, everybody in the audience, we're trying to unload. Well, Jamie's unloading. I have no gear, so I'm standing there. And the audience was divided. And they were like, they came up and said, what are you bringing that American bullshit here? Why couldn't you just, I go, what would you suggest? If it was a house party at your house, I say to a woman there, what would you have done? Well, I would have had a conversation with him. I go, did you pay to see me converse with a guy who systematically abuses female performers? Is that what you paid for? Because I don't remember that on the ticket. And then, interestingly enough, the guy who told me that he was systematically abusing female performers was a guy in a band. And he goes, that guy is known for this. He goes from show to show doing this. In fact, he did it with Lydia. So I go to Lydia. I go, hey, you remember this guy? And she was like, oh, yeah, I remember that asshole. I just had them turn me up turn my monitor, my mix up. Fuck it. I got a microphone. He's not going to. And I go, what an adult way of dealing with things. So. But yeah, jujitsu, it's calming. I just had some surgery on my leg and was out for 10 days, and it was a very tough 10 days to go. If I'm 7 days a week, to be out 10 days and not touring, I can do it when I'm touring because I have a lot of distractions. But it's now part of my cycle. I psychologically need it. Like some people need antidepressants, whatever. I need to be doing it. So, and keep in mind, it's not a peaceful. It's not like I'm worse there than I am anywhere else, man. And I'll tell guys before we start fighting, I go, you know what the number one tool in my arsenal is? And the guys are like, what? I go, mockery. And the guy starts kind of laughing, and I go, oh man, I hear a lot of good things about your jujitsu. He goes, really? I go, no. And then they just proceed to clown them really horribly because I'm deathly afraid that this is not macho bravado. I'm deathly afraid that because I'm older, that the guys are just going to go easy on me. So I want to make sure that they want to murder me. And I tell you, they try every day. It's tough. Like I'm beaten up now. I'm trying to stretch my back as a result of something that happened at 6 o'clock this morning.
So, okay, let's go back to the hardcore. You had a zine in the 80s, early 80s called Birth of Tragedy.
Mm-hmm.
And so the very first band you interviewed was Black Flag, right?
Yes.
Talk about that a little bit. You were taken with the band pretty quick, right?
Yeah, I'd seen them in the 70s in New York. Soho Weekly News had tipped me off to them. And there was this flirtation at the time, if you would fairly nationalist, sympathies, right? Like your Sid Vicious had the swastika T-shirt, and one of the shows I was at, one of the guys was like, "Hey, push, push in the bush," which was a big disco hit at the time. And later, when I went back with Whipping Boy, the moment was right, I sprung it on. This guy's name was Ira. I sprung it on Ira. I was like, "Hey, man, you remember?" And he was like, "Eugene, sorry, man. You don't realize what kind of shit that we used to get on the street then. So when we saw like a normal person in our clubs, I mean, I wasn't rocking punk rock finery then. I think I was just." I was dressed like Robert De Niro in Taxi Driver. That was my fashion template then, actually. So, I mean, in actual fact, yeah, that was exactly what I was doing. So, and um, um, so um, so yeah, there was this weird kind of racial dynamic of uh Patti Smith was rock and roll nigger, and you were never quite sure. And the article in the Soho Weekly News, Dukowski had a hat on that said redneck, and they had just put out Jealous Again with the song White Minority. And rather than they were being cute about it, but they weren't being cute about it. They were not identifying it as irony necessarily. They were like playing with the media. And so I had a friend, his name is Adam Smyer, who's written a great book called Knucklehead. And he's a lawyer here in the Bay Area now, and as he's played with us before. If you watch Oxbow's video, A Cold and Well Lit Place, he's the guy who kind of plays the Duke in the video. And at one point, he we became Facebook friends, and there's a picture of him there, and I go, "What the fuck are you doing in my homeroom?" And he was like, "Oh, you went to Stuyvesant? We went to the same high school. We're like a year or 2 years apart. He's like a year or 2 years younger than me." And he was saying, and we're into the same music. And I go, "How come I didn't see you at the clubs?" He goes, "Man, I was terrified to go. I don't want to go." And he's a lifelong martial artist as well. Was taking karate, but he and his mother, he thought that there was a present danger. But I've always, I remember going when the Berlin Wall fell, and I was over there, and so I stayed in some hotel, and Apple had sent me for some business. And the guy said, "Hey, whatever you do, you'll be fine. But if you go for a walk, don't walk down there. That's East Germany. You'll probably get mugged by skinheads." I was like, okay. And as soon as the guy left me, I fucking, of course, left the hotel and walked straight down there because I wanted to see. And so that's why I went to see Black Flag. And Dez was singing. Dez was singing then, and of course it was, well, nothing's going to happen to me. I mean, it was interesting having Harley write the preface for my memoir, because I remember him from back then as well. And he said something. He said, "Well, what was unusual about Eugene is that he was visibly fit." Right, which I had never thought about, right? Because I was a teenage. I mean, I was in teenage bodybuilding competitions, and so I felt invisible. So, and not in a bad way. It was just like, nobody talked to me, nobody bothered me. I didn't really seek out, I wasn't there for friends. I was just there for the music. So the fact that he would have noted this, I always thought was interesting, and that probably was a key as to why I was left alone. But the Black Flag show was great. I loved Dez's voice. I was not impressed with him as a stage performer, not as much as I was with Rollins. But that was the first time I saw them.
Now, Chuck, you like Chuck the best in terms of as a person, right?
Yeah, he was my favorite. He was my favorite Beatle. Yeah.
What was it about him that you liked?
He just seemed to have a great sense of humor, right? I mean, you could think what you want about the guys in Black Flag, but you don't think sense of humor when you think of Greg Ginn, or and even Henry has a generalized sense of humor, but Henry's sense of humor is not very self-reflexive. Like he's not. He can laugh about himself as long as he's in control of the narrative, but he takes offense very easily. And I found that Chuck was kind of a more expansive thinker, and I mean, being older helped, um, and I enjoyed talking to him a lot more. So, and then Dez, of course, was amusing to me. And then Whipping Boy later played a bunch of shows with DC3, so I got to spend more time with him, and he's a sweetheart. But yeah, Chuck was always my favorite.
Now, you've been pretty kind to about Greg Ginn in interviews. I think maybe more than a lot of other people.
Hmm.
Why do you suppose that is?
Yeah, I guess you're referencing Jim Rulin's book, Corporate Rock Still Sucks: The Rise and Fall of SST Records.
Hmm.
And I mean, I've said this time and time again about characters like John Wayne Gacy and Charles Manson. These people were all nice to me. Okay, Gacy was in jail. I wasn't at his fucking house, right? But he was in prison on death row when he was being nice to me. And Manson same thing, was in prison. But a friend of mine who was Undersecretary of Defense under George H.W. Bush said, Eugene is like a dog. If you're nice to him, he's yours forever. And that's kind of largely true. Yeah, I mean, the flip side of that is if you're shitty to me, I remember that shit for a long time too. So
So Greg was nice to you.
Greg was nice to me, and I liked him. I actually liked him. He's a weird cat. I
Hmm.
mean, you have two types of people: people who act like they're crazy, and people who are really crazy. And I think these guys are just, they're just strange fucking cats, man. He's like, people get hung up on the money thing. We'll just take the money thing out of it. Let's just get rid of the money thing, And I mean, some of the latter day music they just put out, you can't tell me that this was not Marvel worthy. The Tweaker Bees. I don't know if you've ever heard the Tweaker. It's terrible. It's objectively fucking terrible. But they rehearsed this music. They went in the studio and recorded this music. They produced and published this music, and they toured on that music. I mean, this is madness, but he did it. So, and he paid us, so we never had any. I mean, there are people who, like Gary Held from Revolver. I'm a little cranky about him still, because when the deal fell apart for the first Oxbow record, Fuckfest, Pathological was still selling through him. I said, man, you got to stop selling this. This guy's not doing accounting for us, which means it's like somebody broke into my house and stole my shit, and he's selling it, and you're helping him. And he's like, well, I said, I'm gonna burn your fucking place to the ground. Stop selling. He's, well, you're being unreasonable. I was like, unreasonable. You're not countering this. You're not saying, well, we're doing this because I'm not getting anything other except you want to make a profit. I understand that, but stop selling this stuff. So Gary Held, I'm a little cranky, but I've kind of, this was now, we're talking 1980, 1990, 92. I got to let some of this shit go. But Greg Ginn, the check cleared. Yeah,
Hey, you were one of the people he paid.
yeah, and I don't say that. I don't say I. People have said before, oh, because he was afraid you're going to kick his ass. You got to understand, Greg. I don't think he's thinking about things that way. In my imagination, he did it because he liked me. I mean, that's just me thinking that,
Hmm.
But who knows? So
So years later, you have a band with Chuck. I want to hear about that.
blackface.
Blackface.
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
Yes.
I did. I've gone through a couple of different permutations with spoken word, and one of them was like, uh, now I just talk. I don't do any of it. But then I was acting out segments from the different books, and I would have people do music behind me because I just figured I just like it. And so I said, Chuck, and he was buying ads in the Birth of Tragedy, so it was convenient. So Chuck, hey, well, I'm going to be in L.A. In Koreatown doing a show. Could you? He's like, yeah. So Chuck Dukowski and Eugene Robinson, and we had so much fun. We should do something else. And then he gave me the spiel. He goes, I've often thought about doing a band where I play all the Black Flag songs that I've written. I go, that's fucking great. I know these ones. I love them, man. Your songs were my favorite songs. Yeah, and I go, what would you call it? He goes, well, I don't know. Why don't we call it Blackface? I go, that's a fucking great name. That's a really great name. And we're about the only people that could pull it off, and it means a lot of things. It doesn't, and so we did. He came up, and we were rehearsing up here, taking band photos, got a deal with Hydra Head to put the stuff out, and then we would drive down there and rehearse, And then he started getting strange, and then I didn't really see it coming. I just didn't. I just didn't. I didn't see it coming. And the first thing was, so, yeah, I talked to Ian MacKaye. Oh yeah, how's Ian doing? Yeah, he thinks the name is fucked up. I go, oh, you mean Mister Guilty of Being White thinks the name is fucked up? Yeah, he's like, yeah. I go, well, what does he suggest the name we name it? He goes, well, like, what about Black Velvet? I go, man, that's a completely different vibe. What are you fucking talking about? You
Black
know?
Velvet.
Yeah. And then, then he's like, well, do you think Laura could sing a few songs with us? I go, your wife? How's that make any sense? You know? I mean, you have a band with her already. That's that's not this. And he's like, he goes, well, we're not getting enough money on tour. I go, well, we got a gig at the Off Festival in Poland playing support for Iggy Pop, and they want to pay us $19,000. And he's like, well, we're not ready. And I go, well, we'll fucking drive down. We'll stay here for a week, 2 weeks to get ready, man. And then he just said, I can't do it. I can't. It's not happening for me. And he tried to explain, and my attitude about being dumped has been consistently the same since I started getting dumped. And it was like, I don't need an explanation. Well, you gave me all I need to know when you said I don't want to do this anymore. I don't give a shit about the whys or the wherefores. So, all right, we'll see you later. As a label guy, I was most disappointed with the fact that one of the first things he did that was really weird was try to fuck over the label by saying, yeah, all those records you printed, yeah, I don't think I want to put it out. And I'm like, we're not stopping the label, man. That's you as a label guy should know that's happening. We signed the contract, we're doing it. So so yeah, it never happened. I mean, the record came out, but it was supposed to be 4 songs, and I think it ended up being 2. And the other 2 songs, I have no idea where the fuck they are at this point. So
I was on an interview I read with yours when you made a little comment, didn't elaborate, that you said that you've had conversations with Ian MacKaye about Guilty of Being White before.
hmm yeah, it was in the backyard of Tesco's house. It was
Mhm.
talk about in the memoir where we argued about it, And I was like, yeah, man, I've been doing this shit long enough since '77, the swastika shirts and, the push in the bush thing and to be outsider among outsiders. And you never hear me talk about that very much because I never felt physically threatened or worried. But he goes, well, you don't know what it's like to be in DC. I go, I know what it's like to be in America. so so you're in DC, so you're getting a small taste of what I get like 24 fucking hours a day, bro. Fuck off with this. And he didn't repudiate the song, of course, until Tom Araya did it with Slayer. And then suddenly he got to see himself through others' eyes. It was like, yeah, I guess it kind of sucks. I mean, consistency is a hobgoblin of little minds. I'm glad he finally changed his tune on that one, but
Mhm.
he was not willing to do so in Tesco's backyard in 1981. So,
Huh. Yeah. I always heard he kind of like was turned off by the song when he saw some of the people who embraced it.
yeah, of course. How could you miss that there would be a causal connection between
Yeah.
these retrograde elements of but he's got a point, right? you know, I mean, you can't deny a people a moral imperative because there's shit that happened 400 years ago. I feel that way about Germans, right? But of course, it's complex, right? Because I believe the aggrieved parties should be able to complain about it forever and ever and ever. But they should be able to do so with the understanding, like that the people that you're talking to have no dog in that hunt. A 19-year-old German kid absolutely doesn't give a shit, doesn't care, doesn't, it's not my issue what happened in 1943. Like a 19-year-old kid in Virginia, does it fucking 1700s of slavery? I got nothing to do with that. Get off my back with that. So, but, I defend my right to complain about it forever. And I also understand that you completely ignoring me. But then to do the song thing, you guys had to invest a lot of energy in that.
Yeah. Definitely not his best moment.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about the art of performance. Is something that I see you talk about frequently. That you're very interested in the art of performance. And a couple early influences I've seen you mention is Klaus Nomi and the Plasmatics.
Yeah.
Now you're very interested in um, good performance, and that's not gimmicky. That's a good performance. Give me a little.
Well, it's hard to say not gimmicky when you see the plasmatics because, of course, people pay attention to latter day plasmatics, but I was gifted to see them earlier, and same with Klaus Nomi. But the funny thing about Klaus Nomi is that like I'll give you an example. At one point, I decided that I don't feel like wearing clothes, right? Just didn't feel like it. Whatever. And people invest all this energy in concealing their nakedness. I was like, oh fuck it, tired. Like, I'm bumping around my room somebody's knocking, trying to find shorts because I don't want to expose them to my nudity. It's like, fuck that, bro. I'm just tired of this. And I went through odd periods in life where I just stopped combing my hair or stopped sleeping on a mattress. I just started sleeping on the floor because and so I did this thing with nudity, and I said, well, most people don't conceal their nudity because people are going to laugh at them. And so I started walking outside my house naked. And I lived on the edge of a field, and there was walkways and pathways that people would hike to the lake that was near the house. It's on Stanford campus. And at first, that was always everybody's reaction to go, "Oh, there's a naked guy there," but they're just dealing with their own uncomfortability. And when they look at you and you're not at all uncomfortable with it, then it becomes weird and uncomfortable for them, right? Like it's just a transference thing. So this is it's kind of very much like that. That Klaus Nomi was doing something that, on the face of it, was comical with the makeup, and the high operatic singing voice. But if you looked in his eyes and you looked in his face, he absolutely was not fucking joking, and that was totally powerful. And the same thing with Wendy O. Williams. Yeah, she's on stage with her titties out and the black electrical tape, but there, she had it, man. You look in her eyes, and it was like, nah, it might be funny, but it's no fucking joke. And that kind of, and Little Richard did this as well. There's a concert that he did in Paris, and at one point he's like got his socks on and his pants. He's shirtless, and it's like somebody in the audience has pissed him off, and the music is still they're still playing this vamp, like I like expecting him to jump back into the song, and he was just in some other place. And again, under normal circumstances, you might be, hey, look at Richards, he's out of it. But it completely commanded respect because he had opened, like all these chakras were open, and he was just like open to the universe. The universe is moving through him into the audience, and it was fucking powerful. You looked away or you were enveloped by it. So I've lived for moments like that in my own performance and the performance of others. These are states of nirvana, and important to get to. Otherwise, what you're doing is just shtick, right? So
Yeah, I get the line you're drawing. Yeah.
yeah, we played a show in Nottingham, England, at one point, and I'm watching the band play before us, and I'm really digging them. But I'm having this eerie thing, like I don't know what's happening, and I'm looking, and then finally it dawns on me, like they've done 2, 3 songs. I go, "Oh shit, they're Oxbow interpreters." And I go, "I should franchise this shit out, get these guys to do." But the soul of it was mimicry, but the soul of it was absent. The guy was doing what he had seen me do, but without the emotional basis for it. So it was just kind of funny. It was like watching kids do, it was cute. It was funny. So
The first time that you took your clothes off at a show was after. Now, correct me if this is wrong. It was after you played a show in Lansing with Minor Threat, and your pants were just soaked with sweat, and you didn't have money to wash your pants. So you said, going forward, going forward, I'm gonna not wear my pants.
no, no, no. This was kind of I always had a weird kind of competitive thing with Rollins, and he at one point word had gotten back to me that he had decided that not only was he not going to wash his clothes for the duration of a tour, but he was not even going to take them off. And and so I said, "Fuck yeah, okay, I'll fucking meet you and I'll raise you." And at one point, I woke up. We were staying with the Fix in Lansing, Michigan, and one of the Steve is, hey Eugene, come here. And I woke up and I'm looking around for my stuff to put on. I didn't have it. Just fucking grab the towel and walk in. He goes, look at that. And he's looking in the washing machine. He goes, I put a full cup of soap in there and the water is still black. I go, what's in there? He goes, your clothes. I was like, you fucking ruined my fucking experiment. He said, well, you took the pants off so I could do it. So yeah, because it was hot last night. Fuck it, I should never have taken them off. And so then he says, and then of course now the door was open. He goes, moreover, if you're jumping around on stage in those boxes I gave you, he gave me his underwear then because I was broke. He goes, I'm leaving the stage. I go, what are you talking about? He goes, I don't want your dick flopping around on the stage. I go, why do you give a shit? He goes, it's distracting. I go, my penis distracts you. You got bigger issues happening than if that's the issue, you know. He's like, no. So he says, after they get out of just give me my shit after the dryer and don't touch it again. So he gets my stuff out of the dryer and he sews the zippers, the flies of all the boxer shorts shut. So I can wear boxers on stage and without my dick flopping out because it disturbs him. And so when he left the band to go to med school, the first show after that, I was like, Steve's no longer with the band and I'm fucking naked. And I think that's when it happened. So it never happened when Steve was in the band. So it probably didn't happen until until 86 or 87. Which, incidentally, of course, if you're paying attention to timelines, is when I was losing my mind. But it was also incredibly liberating since I had already experimented with nudism before then.
The worst show you ever played was opening for Bad Brains in Oakland.
Oh, you've done your homework, yes.
Okay, what happened?
Oh man, they just got in my fucking head. It's just like I couldn't. It's embarrassing for me to think about. I can't. Man, I can't. I buckled, I folded. It was terrible. I felt like that band I was just talking about that was kind of doing the Oxbow imitation. I mean, I was very comforting and supportive of them, but these guys were just looking at me, and I wasn't doing a Bad Brains imitation, but I was just off my fucking game. It was at the Omni. It was terrible. And I've talked to other guys in the band, and they say, "Oh no, it was a fine show." It was yeah, but I was fucking terrible. But whatever, man. I couldn't concentrate. It was they existed in my mind as so large, like I couldn't get to what I wanted to do because the image of what they had done was blotting out my memory, and I just fucking it was shitty. It was terrible. It pains me to think about even still.
So they didn't even have to do anything. It was just their presence.
Yeah, well, no, mostly it's about leaving the stage in that uncomfortable moment. Like, I've played with plenty of bands that hated us. It's not like the Minutemen hated us. I didn't give a shit. Husker Du, the fucking Greg Norton hated us. Whatever, bro. Fuck you. I don't care. But having to walk by the Bad Brains in the hallway as we're leaving the stage and they're coming on. I mean, because I was hanging out with those guys in New York, so I knew them, right? So it was not like I could just kind of disappear into anonymity. It was just, oh man, I felt like apologizing. Ugh.
Damn. Do you have a ritual or anything that you do to try to get yourself into the right headspace so that you do perform well?
I just like to be left alone. I mean, I remember Rollins going through all this stuff, and it was making I got, and I just, I'll just find some place. Usually, inevitably, there's somebody on the support staff who's one of like they're projecting their feelings of nervousness onto you, and so they come to talk to you, and so but everybody at this point, we've done it long enough, knows just leave them alone, just and I'm cordial, it's like I'm not, Eugene, what do you want? And I'll answer the questions, but typically I'll find some place to hide, and I'll make sure one guy in the band knows where I am hiding, and it's a place where people can't easily get access to me, and I just kind of clear my head, and make sure I've got a straight shot to the stage after, so I don't have to get caught up in whatever other non-stage related bullshit happens. And then, like I just did a show at the Soul Crusher Festival in Copenhagen, and the curtain, there was 3 feet behind the curtain. It's a big venue. It's 3 feet behind the curtain, and so I'm behind the curtain. It's great. And the band, one of the stage guys went back there to break down somebody's drums. He's like, because absolutely you can't see me back there. But he didn't know me, so he left me alone. And then, of course, the first chord started the song, and I could just go right from there to the stage. It was perfect. Just get my head together. So,
at what point do you duct tape the earplugs in? Is that on stage or before?
No. They're already done. I don't like to get caught in technical. That's when I say, in our contract writer, you have to have the mic taped to the cord. Because if it gets separated, like I know it will, I won't. I'm not the tech guy.
Yeah.
You got to fix that shit. I'm not gonna. I hate to see bands do certain things on stage. Like I hate to see bands drink water. It's like you can't make it through the set without drinking water. Now I've got to be subjected to your fucking gustatory issues. Like we gotta, what's next? We gonna pull out your crock pot? I don't want to see it.
Wait, what about Jamie Stewart though? Jamie Stewart takes a drink of water between every song.
I don't like that. I love Jamie, and I know he does it like a comedian for pacing. And the reality of it is, when we did Sal Mineo together, he didn't do that. So, yeah, or if he did it when I wasn't watching.
Gotcha.
But he uses it like punctuation, which is fine. Maybe he's really thirsty. I don't. But part of his thing is kind of like the David Byrne nervous thing, so it ties in. It works for him, but I still don't like it. But I don't like to see people walking along the streets eating food either. So it's just my personal weird thing.
I like that one too. Why don't you like that?
Well, you can't take the fucking time to sit at a table like a normal human being.
Like a normal person.
You were so fucking busy that you got to walk down the street eating that hot dog. Come on, if you're standing by a hot dog stand, I understand it, right? You
Sure.
walk it down. I got a sudden urge to have.
Yeah,
but
that's standing. That's not moving.
Yeah, it's not moving, man. So it's just a thing,
What other stuff do you not like to see on stage?
I don't like to see the audience begging the performers begging the audience to dance. I think that's desperate and sad. I don't like to see compulsive entertaining on stage. By way of joke, like I'm going to make you feel comfortable that I'm here. We're gonna have a good time. What if you don't feel like having a good time? What if you're not? What if you're having a very bad time? And this is just I tape the earplugs in before I get to stage, so I don't have to think about that shit. I don't, and if it somehow happens that the ear that falls out, I'm not readjusting it. I'll just blast my hearing out with that ear because you're not there to see me do tech, and I'm not. Look, if I'm having an argument with my lover, I'm not adjusting my. It's not. This is like I'm in the moment, man. This is it's like taking LSD. Once that trip starts, it starts and it goes until it's over, and that's the way it is.
Don't go anywhere. If you want to hear the rest of this conversation, head over to our Patreon. Thank you for listening to In Defense of Ska. Please rate and review this podcast and tell a friend. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at In Defense of Ska. Pick up Aaron's book, In Defense of Ska, at your local bookstore or online. This podcast is edited by Chris Reeves of Ska Punk International. This is your co-host, Adam Davis of Omnigone, leaving you by saying Ska now more than ever.
How are you feeling, Aaron, after that?
I am like kind of tired and kind of exhilarated because that was a lot of story, and they were all amazing stories.
I mean, Eugene is a pretty intense character.
Sure, yeah.
We didn't tell Eugene that we've met him before, though.
Oh, yeah, that's right. We did not bring that.
Left that part out. But hey, over behind the curtain on our Patreon, we continue the conversation, and it gets kind of dark. We talk with Eugene about the first time he did steroids.
Yeah. And you know what? There's also a portion of behind the curtain. If you haven't signed up for this, Adam and I will talk a little bit about the episode as well. We're going to talk about the time that we met. Eugene. It's an interesting story. Very weird story. So you're going to get to hear that, and then you'll get to hear Eugene talk about the time he did steroids. The first time.
It's really a weird story.
Yeah. It's well worth the $5.
It's worth at least $10.
Yeah, it's worth $10. I mean, you could do 15 if you wanted.
Yeah, you could. You could do 20.
I would not object to it.
Yeah. Okay, we'll talk to you next week.
We got an amazing guest next week, though.
Who's our guest, Aaron? Well,
I'm not going to say his name, but I'll say his nickname. It is the bass fiddleman.
Who could it be?